It seems as though no matter how many months go by, every couple, 3 months, there's a new news story about a massive AAA level studio with gobs of money seemingly taking advantage of indie developers. And I guess this month, the month of July of 2025, is no different. And this story rings very eerily similar to Respawn Entertainment's creation when Vince Zampella and company left Activision and ended up having to sue their former employers, the guys that created Call of Duty and went on to begin the Titanfall and Apex games, ended up suing Activision over unpaid bonuses. And it seems like what is going on now is happening directly between Krafton and this little indie dev studio once upon a time known as Unknown Worlds. So for those of you unfamiliar with Unknown Worlds, it was founded by these three guys, Ted Gill, Charlie Cleveland, and Max McGuire, who started by creating the beloved Half-Life model Natural Selection. You guys remember Natural Selection back in like 2000, 2001? Well, that was the beginning of the studio Unknown Worlds. And throughout the years, they slowly started working on what would become Subnautica. Subnautica released to massive, massive critical acclaim through what would have been a model of the, I guess, early access process, because this is one of those Cinderella stories where early access actually made sense and actually worked and ended up coming out as a 1.0 that was an absolute banger of a game. In 2021, in October of 2021, the South Korean mega studio Krafton released a presser saying that they purchased Unknown Worlds and would be keeping the entirety of the dev team internally at Krafton to work on their projects as they saw fit, and they would have complete and total autonomy. For this, the intention was to have them work on a Subnautica 2 successor. And all seemed well. It was pretty quiet. You didn't really see mention of anything that Unknown Worlds was really grinding away on until about 2023, when stuff started cropping up with them really focusing in on Subnautica 2. Until, of course, this year. They seemingly out of nowhere replaced Gill, Cleveland, and McGuire with a new CEO, the former CEO of Striking Distance, Steve Papoutzis. Now, Papoutzis, the studio that he was in front of, was in charge of creating the game The Callisto Protocol, also another Krafton studio that did not meet with nearly as much critical acclaim. It was pretty well slammed by probably half the people that reviewed it. Also, this studio was known for making the Dead Space series of games, so they do have something in there, but seem to have been a relative shell of its former self. In its press release, Krafton states Papoutzis replaces the previous leadership team, Gill, Charlie Cleveland, and Max McGuire, effective immediately. While Krafton sought to keep the Unknown Worlds co-founders and original creators of the Subnautica series involved in the game's development, the company wishes them well on their next endeavors. And it kind of left everyone scratching their head. Then on July 3rd on the Unknown Worlds website, there was a post that was made from apparently someone at Krafton with an open letter that says, "Hello Subnauts, we know you've got a lot of questions and concerns about the news from our publisher regarding the leadership changes. We want to take a moment to reflect on the vision and core values of exploration and discovery. They have not only shaped the identity of the entire series, but they continue to guide how we think, build, and create every day." They also go on to say that they're supporting the regime change and state that it was more or less necessary. They also state that the game's development hasn't changed. People are working on it every day. They still plan on releasing a single player with co-op being optional as an experience, and there will be no loot boxes, sounding like they want to really talk to the Western audience with that one. But they end it by saying there will be an update to their schedule and more information, including the early access timeline, coming soon. Now, all of this felt a little bit ominous. And then on the 4th of July, Charlie Cleveland, on his own blog, released a blog post that ended up saying some rather scathing things. In this blog post, he goes through the history of the studio and his passion in wanting to create Subnautica and where he had been going from there. But the head-scratcher, the shocking moment in this blog post, is that at the very end, he says something about how he's not only excited to see the release of Subnautica 2, or why you should be able to understand that, but that he was surprised at the decisions that the mothership had made in this case. He says, "You can see why Max, Ted, myself, and the Unknown Worlds team for our community and all events have been quite a shock. We know the game is ready for early access, and we know you're ready to play it. And while we thought this was going to be our decision to make, that decision is in Krafton's hands. And after all these years, to find that I'm no longer able to work at the company, I started stings. So then the question remained, why then would they have let them go if it was going all according to plan and if everyone was excited and things were looking that the way that they were supposed to? What was the problem? Well, on July 9th, Krafton released a statement saying that Subnautica 2 was going to be delayed until 2026. That very same day, just hours afterward, Bloomberg's Jason Schreier released an article, a scathing article, where he states that people who wished to remain anonymous from inside of the Unknown Worlds studio, people that worked for the studio, stated that there was a bonus structure, performative bonus structure, of over $250 million in bonuses based on 2025 end-of-year sales for Subnautica 2. And the concern was, now that there was all of this regime change and this delay into 2026, that these bonuses would now no longer have to be paid by Krafton, who, by the way, purchased the studio for some $500 million in 2021. Now it looks sus, right? Everyone suddenly loses their mind. Krafton is the bad guy. They are going overboard, and now they're pulling what Activision tried to pull on Zampella and West, and they're not paying out their bonuses. Looks like they're gonna end up in court over it, right? Well, not so fast. The very next day, on July 10th, just yesterday, Krafton releases a presser, a pop-up window on their home webpage that's titled, "To Our 12 Million Fellow Subnauts. Inevitable leadership change driven by project abandonment despite holding 90% of earnout for themselves." Whew, here we go. They go on to say, specifically, in addition to the initial $500 million purchase price, we allocated approximately 90% of the up to $250 million earnout compensation to the 3 former executives with the expectation they would demonstrate leadership and active involvement in the development of Subnautica 2. However, the former leadership abandoned the responsibilities entrusted to them. Subnautica 2 was originally planned for an early access launch in early 2024, but the timeline has since been significantly delayed. Krafton made multiple requests to Charlie and Max to resume their roles as game director and technical director respectively, but both declined to do so. In particular, following the failure of Moonbreaker, Krafton asked Charlie to devote himself to the development of Subnautica 2. However, instead of participating in the game development, he chose to focus on a personal film project. They then went on to say they felt as though their hand was forced and they were forced into having to make this regime change decision. They also then went on to say that anyone that was still working for the design development team would be adequately compensated for their work, and they believed in making sure that those people were made whole. You would think that maybe that would be the end, but no. There's a couple of scathing accusations in there, some pretty shocking ones, and there are receipts. Well, we have receipts. But on July 10th, same day, Charlie releases another blog post basically saying he's going to sue them. In a blog post titled "Lawsuit," he says, "We filed a lawsuit against Krafton. The details should eventually become at least mostly public. You all deserve a full story. Suing a multi-billion-dollar company in a painful public and possibly protracted way was certainly not on my bucket list, but this needs to be made right. Subnautica has been my life's work, and I would never willingly abandon it or the amazing team that has poured their hearts into it. As for the earnout, the idea that Max, Ted, and I wanted to keep it for ourselves is totally untrue. I'm in this industry because I love it, not for riches. Historically, we've always shared our profits with the team and did the same when we sold the studio. You can be damn sure we'll continue the earnout/bonus as well. They deserve it for all their incredible work trying to get this great game into your hands." Now, there are a few things in this story that are a bit conflicting. The first is that the earliest we were able to find was on page 8 of their Q3 2023 earnings call that they have with investors to do their quarterly reporting, where they talk about Subnautica 2 and its assumed release in 2025. Now, there is no mention of 2024 anywhere in there at all, but that could be a 1.0 release assumption of 2025, not necessarily a 2024 early access release. But needless to say, that has obviously been pushed. But there is no mention of a 2024 early access launch. So I'm not really sure where they've gotten that. In fact, there was also an Unknown Worlds press release made in February of 2024 stating that there would not be an early access release option in 2024 at all. In fact, they were looking at somewhere significantly later than that. So while they maintain this idea of an early access thing that was supposed to happen in 2024, we're not really seeing that. Of course, there could have been internal discussions about a 2024 release or possibly even an early or late 2024 release, but again, we haven't seen anything about that yet. But to lend more credibility to what Krafton is saying, yes, he absolutely does have a movie studio called Abyssal Films that he seemingly has been working very, very involved in since about December of last year, at least insofar as his own website and the film's progress or whatever has been concerned. There's also this image of what looks like it's going to be an elf-inspired holiday style of movie, uses AI art for whatever reason. In an April 3rd, 2025 podcast that he did, he talked about how he very much needed to step away from Subnautica because he had been working on it for so long. And in regard to an interview that he did regarding Moonbreaker, he also said that he needed to switch away from Subnautica. He had been working on it for 5 years, as intensely as he'd been working on Moonbreaker for 5 years. But this game he wanted to keep working on. He loves Subnautica, but those 5 years was really tough. On his website, abyssal.co, he talks about in his About section that he's been designing video games for 25 years, like Natural Selection 2, Subnautica, and Moonbreaker. He loves making games, but wanted to try something new. At the end of 2023, he left San Francisco after almost 20 years and moved to Los Angeles, and he was very excited about how he was meeting so many like-minded people. He then goes on to talk about how he's making 3 film projects at once: Zeros, Nutmeg and Mistletoe, and a secret project. Zeros being a zombie film, Nutmeg and Mistletoe being a holiday-themed film, and then the secret project we don't really know. But how somebody could run a timeline for Subnautica 2's release and simultaneously create 3 movies in a different city, seemingly, from the rest of his development team, I don't really know how that's possible. But he does have semi-regularly posted interesting little articles and updates and these blog posts and these podcasts and all this other stuff that are going into talking about multiple timelines for multiple projects. All of which I would assume would sound kind of expensive, right? I mean, the money's got to come from somewhere to build this stuff, doesn't it? Now, don't get me wrong, Krafton is Krafton, and it wouldn't be the first time that a AAA studio ended up deciding that they weren't going to pay out bonuses for sake of just not wanting to pay them out and come up with creative means by which to make sure that that doesn't happen. But at the same time, it doesn't really lend an awful lot of credibility to somebody like Charlie here when he is doing other things than just focusing on the game, that he has massive bonuses and structured bonus payouts for him and another 99 people worth of a team that are trying to get this thing done so that they all can make money, because maybe they're not focused on a bunch of other things at the same time like this. Now, of course, all of this could be performative. It could be just stuff to make it look really good. After all, most of Hollywood is about trying to present yourself in a way that looks as marketable as possible, right? But it doesn't really lend any credibility here when you're starting to talk about lawsuits. Of course, all of this comes out in the wash, and I'm more than sure that Krafton will try to fire some pretty significant salvos that have to do with exactly this kind of thing, and Charlie, I'm sure, will do his part as well. At any rate, we will definitely keep you guys abreast of all of the things that are going on with this case, because it's interesting, and it's provocative, and it's got all the makings of a killer news story. So anyway, my name is OnePeg. Thank you for lending me your eyeballs, everybody. Please be sure to sub the channel if you find this interesting or entertaining in any way, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.